Good evening, and welcome aboard Eerie Hour. Tonight, we sail into the endless, merciless waters of the open sea, where comfort and luxury often hide something much darker. These are 10 true cruise ship stories that didn't end with cocktails and sunsets, but with fear, loss, and the kind of horror that drifts just beneath the waves. Told by passengers, crew members, and maritime investigators, these are not bedtime tales. They're real events, with real victims trapped in terror miles away from land, safety, or escape. From mysterious vanishings to horrifying crimes, each case tears away the bright, polished image of cruise life to show the truth the industry hopes you never discover. Verified through Coast Guard files, legal documents, and witness statements, these stories reveal one chilling fact. Sometimes, the most beautiful places are the most dangerous. If you're new to Eerie Hour, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell, because every night we bring you true horror, and not the kind you can wake up from. Let's begin. They haven't stopped since the nightmare began 3 weeks ago. Tyler's smiling face from that last dinner, laughing at something ridiculous Kevin said about the buffet shrimp, still flashes in my head every time I close my eyes. I was 26 then, a junior accountant living in a small Chicago apartment with 3 guys who had become my best friends since college. For almost 2 years, we'd been saving money, begging for time off work, all to make this Caribbean trip happen. Before 2 of us moved away for new jobs, this was supposed to be our big celebration. Josh, Tyler, Kevin, and I had booked rooms next to each other on the Coral Princess's 7th deck. Josh was the guy with the camera, always filming. Kevin was the prankster who kept things fun. Tyler was the curious one, always chasing something new. The cruise felt like the perfect way to close one chapter of our friendship before life pulled us in different directions. The ship was massive, like a floating city, with pools, restaurants, bars, and endless entertainment. The first couple of days went by exploring, drinking, and figuring out which excursions to book. Tyler had this odd habit of waking up before sunrise to watch from the upper deck, coffee in one hand and his worn-out journal in the other. He'd done it every morning, writing or snapping pictures like he was trying to trap the perfect moment. But around 5 a.m. on the 3rd morning, he mentioned seeing some crew members arguing near one of the restricted areas. At breakfast, he joked about it, saying it looked serious, more than just normal ship talk. He kept bringing it up that day, asking if we'd noticed anything strange about the crew. We just laughed it off. But that night, something felt off. Tyler seemed sharper than usual during dinner, focused, scanning the restaurant like he was watching someone. He pointed out crew members he'd seen earlier, jotting down notes in his journal and timing their movements. We thought he was just bored and overthinking things. Then he whispered that he overheard 2 cleaning staff talking quickly in Spanish about another crew member until they realized he was listening. Their sudden silence and the way they rushed off unsettled us. Still, we brushed it aside and went to the late-night comedy show, then the casino. Around 1 a.m. we said goodnight through the connecting door. Tyler's room, 7142, was right next to mine. I heard him moving around for a while, drawers opening, water running, the TV switching to some talk show. Nothing unusual. The sea was rough that night, but the rocking helped me fall asleep faster than usual. Then, at exactly 6:47 a.m., loud knocking jolted me awake. I blinked at the clock, half asleep, wondering why housekeeping was pounding so early. But it wasn't housekeeping. Josh and Kevin stood outside, talking over each other, panic on their faces. They'd gone to Tyler's room to surprise him with breakfast, coffee, and pastries from the buffet, but he wasn't there. His bed was untouched. His journal was open on the desk, filled with writing from the night before. The curtains swayed in the breeze, and his balcony door was slightly open. The coffee maker sat ready, timer set for 5 o'clock a.m., just like always. But it had never started. We called security immediately. Within minutes, officers filled the hallway. Captain Martinez, the woman leading security, questioned us with cold efficiency, like she'd done this many times before. She asked if Tyler drank too much, if he had depression, if he might have sleepwalked. Her questions felt rehearsed. When we mentioned his curiosity about the crew and the restricted areas, her tone changed. She grew distant, careful. Then she told us calmly that Tyler had likely suffered an accident during his morning routine, and that passengers often misinterpret normal crew activity. But deep down, we knew there was more to it, something the ship didn't want us to see. 2 hours later, the ship's intercom came alive. The captain's voice broke through the static, and for a full minute, silence filled the halls after the grim message. Someone had gone overboard during the night. But here's what didn't sit right with me. They never actually searched the ship. No full inspection, no room-by-room check, no call for passengers to report anything strange. Instead, they instantly switched to their overboard protocol, scanning the ocean with binoculars and calling the Coast Guard. When Josh suggested checking the deck cameras, Captain Martinez quickly explained they were under maintenance. Her answer came too fast, too rehearsed. The timing didn't make sense, and the way she said it made the air feel heavier. Later that afternoon, the three of us sat in the lounge, trying to make sense of it all. That's when we overheard something that froze us in place. At the next table, two crew members, a maintenance worker, and a guest services rep were whispering. They assumed the background noise would cover their voices, but we heard enough. The maintenance man muttered something about it being the third one this season, and that they needed to be more careful picking the right people. The guest services rep immediately hushed him, saying management handled the paperwork and their only job was to stay on schedule. Then they spotted us watching, and quickly walked off in different directions. The rest of the day, we tried to investigate quietly. We talked to passengers here and there, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything strange. Around 2 a.m., an older couple from Texas said they'd overheard a fight on the deck above their cabin, but when they looked out, they only saw a crew member cleaning equipment. Another woman, traveling alone, mentioned seeing someone being led down a service hallway the previous night. She assumed it was just a drunk guest being helped back to their room. Every story we heard hinted at something happening late at night, something that didn't fit normal ship routines. Whenever we questioned crew members about procedures or rules, their answers didn't match. By the last night of the cruise, everything boiled over. Josh had been recording everything, photos, videos, notes, and planned to hand it all to the police once we docked. Around 11 p.m., someone knocked on his door. Two crew members stood there, saying they needed to inspect his cabin for a maintenance issue. Josh refused at first, but then they showed him some kind of official paper claiming it was a safety check. They were polite, but pushy. During the inspection, Josh's phone disappeared right off his nightstand. After about 20 minutes, the crew left, saying they'd found nothing wrong, but his evidence was gone. The next morning, Captain Martinez herself offered to help him file a lost property report, casually suggesting that phones sometimes get misplaced during rough seas. We left the ship feeling empty, sad, angry, and certain we'd never truly know what happened to Tyler. 2 weeks later, we received a formal letter from the cruise line. They said their investigation confirmed Tyler had fallen overboard during his morning walk. They included a small check and asked us to sign a statement confirming their thorough findings. We didn't sign it. We found out Tyler wasn't the first to vanish from that very same ship. Kevin reached out to a maritime attorney who specialized in cruise disappearances. In the past 3 years alone, there had been 6 similar cases, all labeled accidents. Every single missing passenger had been asking questions, poking around in areas they weren't supposed to. The cruise line had powerful lawyers, and since these incidents happened in international waters, jurisdiction was murky. Still, the lawyer was building a case. I think about it every day. If Tyler stumbled upon something he shouldn't have, something that made him dangerous to them, maybe he uncovered what the company truly hides below its shiny image. I still wonder if the truth about that night will ever come out. I still hear the waves when I close my eyes. I still see that ship in my nightmares. I'm a 34-year-old accountant from Denver, and last September I booked a relaxing week aboard the Ocean Majesty, hoping for peace after 2 grueling years of work. My doctor had even warned me about my stress, saying I needed a break. 7 days at sea with no spreadsheets, no deadlines, just sun, water, and silence. The cruise brochure promised paradise. Endless food, pools, music, and every kind of entertainment. And for the first 3 days, it delivered. I spent my mornings reading on deck. 7. Wandering the ship in the afternoons and dining at different restaurants every evening. The ship felt like a floating city, carrying nearly 4,000 people. I made friends with Janet and Robert, a retired couple from Portland. They'd been on dozens of cruises and loved showing me the best spots. Janet's laugh carried across the dining hall, and Robert's bright Hawaiian shirts made him impossible to miss. We'd meet every morning for breakfast on the Serenity deck, sipping coffee as the ocean shimmered around us. But that peace shattered on Wednesday morning, the 4th day. Around 6:30 a.m., I woke with a strange feeling. The ship's motion felt wrong, jerky, uneven. Even the engines sounded different, like they were straining. I thought maybe we'd hit rough weather, but when I stepped onto my balcony, the ocean was calm. Then I saw them, several other ships far in the distance, For 3 days, we hadn't seen a single vessel, yet now there were several. Golden sunlight reflected off the waves as I dressed quickly and went to meet Janet and Robert. The moment I stepped into the dining area, I felt it. Unease. No laughter, no chatter. Crew members huddled together, whispering by the coffee counter. At our table, Janet and Robert looked deeply worried. Robert's face was pale beneath his tan, and Janet wasn't smiling. She stared out at the distant ships, clutching her cup tightly. She whispered that some passengers had been spreading strange rumors, that the ship had changed course during the night without notice. Around 9 a.m., Captain Harrison's voice boomed over the intercom, but this time it sounded tense. He ordered all passengers to return to their cabins and remain there until further notice due to navigational adjustments. No reason, no time frame. The tone of his voice drained the color from everyone's faces. The whispering crew suddenly turned active, directing people toward elevators with forced smiles. Families hurriedly gathered their things, fear flickering in their eyes. I saw a little girl tugging her mother's hand, asking, "Can't we go to the pool?" The mother just murmured, "Soon, honey," though her voice shook. The ship felt like it had turned into a ghost. The laughter and music vanished, replaced by the echo of footsteps and anxious whispers. On my way to my cabin, I glanced through a window and froze. Those distant ships weren't passenger liners or cargo carriers. They were military. Sleek gray hulls cutting through the sea, figures moving along their decks, metallic shapes gleaming in the sunlight, equipment that definitely wasn't for fishing. My pulse quickened as I hurried to my cabin. Once inside, I went straight to my balcony. 4 military ships surrounded us, forming a perimeter. Each one flew a deep red flag marked with an unfamiliar symbol. I could see soldiers moving on the decks, armed and alert. Through the wall, I heard muffled voices, someone crying, someone else trying to calm them down. The ship's engines went silent, and we just floated there, trapped within that circle of gray steel. At 11 a.m., the intercom came on again. But this time, it wasn't Captain Harrison. A different voice, calm but cold, spoke through the speakers. It carried a heavy accent. "This is Commander Valdez of the Maritime Defense Force," he said. "The Ocean Majesty has entered restricted waters without authorization. You are now under military escort. Remain in your cabins until this matter is resolved." His tone was icy, mechanical, like we weren't people, just cargo. When the announcement ended, the silence was suffocating. No one moved. Even the usual creaking of the ship sounded muffled, as if the ocean itself was listening. Hours crawled by. The front desk line was dead. The Wi-Fi didn't work. Outside, the warships kept their distance but never left. Around 2 p.m., a deep rumble filled the air. Helicopters. Their blades thumped overhead. It's shaking the ship. I pressed my face to the glass just in time to see soldiers descending from one of them, ropes whipping in the wind. My stomach turned as I realized they were boarding us. It wasn't some mix-up or diplomatic confusion. We were being taken. The fear was thick enough to taste. We had no idea what was going on or what they wanted. Through the walls, I could hear arguing, the elderly couple across the hall shouting, the woman begging her husband to stay put while he insisted on demanding answers. Then, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor, not soft crew shoes, but boots, hard, deliberate. Knocks started echoing down the hallway, firm, commanding. A few doors opened, followed by voices speaking in Spanish. Then the knocking came closer. My heart pounded in my throat. When the knock finally hit my door, I froze. I didn't know whether to open it or hide, but fear of not opening felt worse. When I finally did, I saw a young woman standing there. Lisa, the bartender from the pool deck. She looked pale, her usual cheerful grin replaced by trembling panic. Beside her stood a uniformed soldier, his eyes sharp and cold. In a thick, foreign-sounding accent, the soldier asked for my ID while checking room numbers on a printed list. His gear looked real, heavy, military grade, not for show. His uniform was spotless, covered in patches I didn't recognize. He glanced at my passport, gave a small nod, and moved to the next door. For a second, Lisa caught my eye. Before the soldiers went farther down the hallway, I saw her mouth one word. Sorry. That single word made everything suddenly feel real. Someone I had shared jokes and drinks with was now terrified, acting like a guide for armed military men. Then Captain Harrison's voice came over the intercom around 7 p.m., but this time, his tone was completely different. Gone was his usual calm authority. It was replay, said with something that sounded close to defeat. He said diplomatic talks were happening and that our ship had accidentally entered disputed waters because of navigational errors. He tried to reassure us, saying everything was under control and that our safety was the top priority. But then he said something that froze me completely. He admitted that our situation began when someone decided to change the ship's course to save fuel, just to save money. And now 4,000 passengers were paying the price. I realized we were trapped, caught in a mistake made by greed. Armed soldiers patrolled our decks through the night, their boots echoing on metal floors, while distant military ships circled us like predators in the dark sea. The standoff stretched through the night until, after long, intense negotiations, we were finally released the next morning. Weeks later, the cruise line quietly paid off complaints and fired Captain Harrison. But that helpless feeling stayed with me. The memory of standing in the middle of the ocean, stuck between governments and corporate greed, unable to do a thing. I never did find out which country's waters we had entered. Before that, I had always been on the move as a pharmaceutical sales rep, living from one hotel room to another. This cruise was supposed to be my break, my first real vacation in 3 years. At 28, I was tired of airports, meetings, and fake smiles. I gave myself this cruise as a birthday gift, 7 full days to forget everything. The Celestial Horizon had glowing reviews, famous for its food, luxury, and calm Mediterranean routes. With nearly 4,000 passengers, it was massive, but the marble lobbies and glittering chandeliers made it feel elegant and personal, sunlight bouncing like diamonds across the decks. It all began on our 3rd night at sea, not long after leaving Barcelona. I had been excited for dinner at Palazzo Nero, the ship's most exclusive restaurant. Dee paid an extra $200 for the reservation after hearing about the 7-course chef's tasting menu. The maitre d', a tall man with silver hair and a thick Italian accent, seated me at a corner table facing the endless ocean. Everything about the evening was perfect. Soft candlelight, smooth jazz, and the gentle rocking of the ship made everything feel almost unreal. I followed the sommelier's suggestion and ordered the full tasting menu, each dish paired with rare wines I couldn't even pronounce. Every bite was flawless. From the first appetizer to the final dessert, a light panna cotta that dissolved like silk on my tongue. I went to bed certain that this night would be the highlight of my trip. But around 2 a.m., something changed. I woke up dizzy, my head pounding and my stomach twisting like I'd swallowed broken glass. At first, I thought it was motion sickness, but as I lay there listening to the ship's engines hum below, I knew something wasn't right. My body ached, my skin felt cold and damp, and every time the ship tilted, it felt like the room was spinning twice as fast. I barely made it to the bathroom before I started vomiting, a sour, metallic taste filling my mouth. Between my own retching, I could hear faint moans through the walls, the same sick sounds coming from other cabins. People were throwing up everywhere. By morning, the medical bay was overflowing. A line of pale, trembling passengers stretched down the corridor when I stumbled there, trying to stay upright. The ship's doctor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, moved quickly between patients, her voice calm, but her face full of worry. I overheard her whisper to a nurse that over 60 passengers had reported the same symptoms overnight. All of them had eaten at Palazzo Nero. The other restaurants, the buffet, the steakhouse, even the pizza place, were fine. Their customers were healthy. I stood in line for nearly 2 hours, watching more people arrive, some so weak they could barely walk. Crew members kept insisting it was just a stomach bug, very common on cruises, they said, but their faces told a different story. Fear. By the next day, things had spiraled out of control. It wasn't food poisoning anymore. 3 passengers, a mother and her teenage daughter, and an older couple from Ohio, were taken to the ship's ICU. Their bodies weren't just reacting to spoiled food, they were shutting down. Amanda, a nurse I had befriended during my visits to the medical area, told me quietly that the patients were showing signs of something far more serious: neurological problems, irregular heartbeats, and severe dehydration. She'd been working on cruise ships for 8 years, and even she said she'd never seen anything like it before. That was when the fear really set in. Something was happening on this ship, something no one was allowed to talk about. She whispered to me one evening, her voice trembling, that the blood tests were showing something she had never seen before. Very high levels of toxins, nothing like normal food poisoning. By the 4th day, the captain finally made another announcement. His voice came through the speakers sharp and uneasy, the tension barely hidden. He said every sick passenger would get full medical treatment and a refund while the company investigated what he called an isolated incident at Palazzo Nero. But as I looked around the ship, the captain's words felt empty. More cabins were locked, and the decks that had once been alive with music and laughter were now silent. The ship no longer felt like a paradise, it felt like a floating prison. Groups of passengers whispered to one another, eyeing crew members with suspicion. Most people were too scared to eat anything unless it was sealed food they'd packed themselves. The once bustling dining halls were half empty, filled only with anxious silence and the sound of the ocean roars. Outside. Security on board had grown tighter. Guards now stood at entrances to areas that had always been open before, and the crew's behavior had changed in unsettling ways. They moved fast, avoided eye contact, and only spoke to each other in hurried, hushed voices. Something was wrong, and they knew it. On the 5th day, I overheard something that made everything even darker. I was sitting in the ship's library, the only quiet place left, when I heard 2 cleaning staff arguing in Spanish near the shelves. They were whispering harshly, and though they spoke quickly, I understood parts of it thanks to my college Spanish classes. I caught names, Venzas, Carlos, and the word revenge. One of them said they had warned management about him months ago. When they noticed me listening, they froze, then walked away quickly. But the name, Carlos Mendoza, stayed burned in my mind. Later, Amanda confirmed it. Carlos was a sous chef who worked in the Palazzo Nero kitchen. She told me he had a record of bad behavior and constant arguments with the management and even with some passengers. He had recently been denied a promotion to head chef, a position given to someone less experienced but better liked. Everything started to make sense in a horrifying way. That night when we all got sick, Carlos had intentionally poisoned certain dishes, focusing on the most expensive meals ordered by guests who had paid for the exclusive tasting menu. The thought made my skin crawl. The precision of it all. He had managed to poison dozens of people without affecting any other restaurants or crew members. That level of control meant this wasn't an accident or a burst of anger. It was planned. Amanda told me that the lab results showed traces of industrial cleaning solvent mixed with a normal cooking ingredient. It was something that would hide the taste but destroy internal organs once eaten. Hearing that hit me like a punch. This wasn't food poisoning. It was deliberate poisoning. We weren't victims of a kitchen mistake. We were part of one man's twisted act of revenge. The worst part was knowing Carlos was still somewhere on that ship, walking the same halls as us, maybe even cooking again while passengers continued to suffer. Once that truth sank in, paranoia became unbearable. Every crew member started to look dangerous. Every meal felt like a trap. I began to notice small details, the way some staff avoided eye contact, how others seemed to know something but refused to speak. Arguments between different departments seemed to break out more often. Through a window near the dining area, I watched the kitchen crew during dinner service. They looked tense, moving with quick, secretive motions. I couldn't stop asking myself, were more people involved? Was this a larger plot? Or was Carlos acting alone? My thoughts became obsessive. I couldn't rest or eat properly. I started hoarding sealed snacks from the gift shop and avoided anything prepared in the kitchen. At night, I lay awake listening to footsteps in the hall, too scared to sleep. I imagined someone slipping poison through the air vents or under my door. The ship that once felt like a dream now felt like a maze full of invisible dangers. Then came day 6, the night everything changed. I couldn't sleep, so I went out for air. The corridors were quiet, except for the hum of the engines. As I walked near the crew quarters, I stopped when I heard voices coming from a half-open door. Inside, I saw Carlos talking animatedly with 2 other crew members I didn't recognize. His expression froze me where I stood. He was smiling, not the smile of regret, but of satisfaction. I caught pieces of their conversation, English mixed with Spanish, and I heard him say something about showing them what happens when you don't respect us, and teaching them a lesson. My stomach turned as I realized what he meant. One of the other men stepped back, shaking his head, but Carlos only grew louder, his voice filled with excitement and pride. He wasn't sorry. He was proud of what he had done. That's when I knew this wasn't just cruelty. It was revenge carried out by someone who felt unstoppable. The isolation of being trapped at sea made everything worse. I knew I had to act, but fear kept my hands shaking. The next morning, I went straight to Amanda and told her everything I had heard. Her face went pale as she listened. She confirmed that Carlos had been the one running the kitchen on the night of the poisoning. Together, we decided not to go to ship security. They might have been compromised or simply too scared to handle it. Instead, Amanda helped me contact the Coast Guard using the ship's satellite line. We gave them Carlos's name, his motive, and every detail we had. Their response was immediate. Within hours, a Coast Guard cutter reached us and surrounded the ship. Armed officers boarded quietly, moving through the corridors with precision. Most passengers had no idea what was happening. They only saw more guards walking the decks, calm but serious. Carlos was arrested that same day. It all ended so quickly that it felt unreal. When confronted with evidence and testimonies from crew members who finally spoke up, he confessed. He had poisoned the food on purpose using industrial chemicals. He had planned everything for weeks, learning the restaurant's routines and timing the attack to hurt as many people as possible. The affected passengers, including me, were immediately taken to a hospital in Naples for treatment. I spent weeks recovering, but eventually I fully healed. The cruise line, drowning in lawsuits, went bankrupt soon after. And Carlos Mendoza, his smile still burned into my memory, was convicted of bioterrorism and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Even now, long after I recovered, I can still taste that metallic bitterness and feel the same cold terror that swept through the ship the night we realized we had all been poisoned. The experience taught me that real evil often hides behind the most ordinary faces, and that the biggest danger usually comes from people who've already lost everything. I can never enjoy fancy dining the same way again. Even now, I always check the seals on my food containers and avoid places where the kitchen is hidden from sight. Some fears never fade, even when justice is served. Working the night shift as a pool deck supervisor on the Celestial Voyager wasn't my dream job, but it paid enough to get me through my marine biology degree. Spring of 2019 was long and restless. The cruise season was in full swing. Kids yelling all day, the smell of sunscreen and sea salt everywhere, and then that eerie silence that wrapped around the pool decks after dark. When no one was watching, I'd sneak a snack from the passenger buffets or eat leftovers from the crew mess while sleeping in my tiny room on Deck 3. I was 22, still figuring life out. Under the dim deck lights, I usually spent my nights reading textbooks, sometimes pacing around to make sure no passengers were sneaking in for a midnight swim or that no equipment was broken. Ship policy made it clear, after 11 p.m. the pool areas were off limits, especially while at sea. The loneliness didn't bother me. In fact, I liked it. The whole aquatic complex belonged to me during those quiet hours between midnight and dawn. The Olympic-sized lap pool, the family pool, the splash zone, and the hot tubs, all of it was mine to watch over. After a whole day of screaming kids, drunk adults, and chaos, the silence felt like peace. I always set up my small station on a deck chair near the main pool, a thermos of coffee beside me, my textbooks spread out, and the soft hum of the engines underneath. The ship would creak now and then, water filters hummed quietly, and the night rolled smoothly by. It was calm, steady, perfect for St. Uding and surviving the long season. But everything changed one Wednesday night in late July. I had been working there for about 3 months and was used to my routine. Clock in at 11:45, do the first safety check, then dive into my reading. The deck still held the warmth of the day, and the air was still, the ocean calm. I remember how the pool lights shimmered blue across the water as I opened my organic chemistry book. The ship had been busy that day, so maintenance had boosted the chlorine levels and pool toys were left scattered everywhere. Now, at nearly 1 a.m., the place was empty, just like every other night. That's when I heard it, a sudden splash from the lap pool. It sliced through the quiet like a knife. At first, I thought it was just the pool cleaner hitting the wall harder than usual. The ship's rocking could mess with the cleaner's programming sometimes, and those machines had a habit of acting up. But then I heard something else, a sound that froze me in place. Someone was gasping for air. The noise echoed across the metal walls, harsh, uneven, terrified. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded human. My chest tightened as I grabbed my flashlight, set down my book, and stood up. The lap pool was about 50 yards away, partly hidden by fake palm trees and tropical plants. I called out, warning that the pool was closed, my voice shaking slightly as it echoed back at me. No reply, just splashing. and those horrible, desperate gasps that seemed to come from the water itself. My shoes squeaked as I walked faster, my light cutting through the darkness. When I finally turned the corner and pointed my flashlight at the lap pool, my heart almost stopped. The water shimmered under the blue lights, but there was no one there. No swimmer, no pool cleaner, nothing. The ship was steady, the sea calm, yet the pool water churned violently as if something invisible was thrashing beneath the surface. The ripples moved fast, scattering light across the tiles. The gasping grew louder, right above the water, like someone fighting to stay alive. But there was nothing there. I stood frozen, staring, unable to move. For what felt like forever, I just watched, hoping to see something, anything that made sense. But there was only water, shifting, alive with something unseen. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The water went still, perfectly flat, reflecting the overhead lights like glass. Even the usual hum of the ship seemed to fade away, leaving only silence. It was the kind of silence that presses on your ears, that makes you realize how small you really are. For the next hour, I searched every inch of that deck, every storage room, every shadow, every corner where someone might hide. Nothing. I even called ship security and reported what I thought was a trespasser. When Officer Brennan arrived, I felt a strange mix of relief and embarrassment. We did another walk around, checked all the access doors, and reviewed the security cameras. Everything was locked, secure, quiet. Later, the footage showed me talking to no one, just pacing by the pool with my flashlight, speaking to empty space. Brennan said maybe I'd heard noises from the lower deck pools or the hull shifting in the waves. He was polite, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Still, I knew what I heard. Those sounds weren't from the ship. They were real, too real, human, panicked, drowning. I couldn't shake it off. For the next few nights, I kept glancing toward the lap pool every time the filtration system clicked or the hull creaked. I told myself it was just stress, too much caffeine, too little sleep, too much studying. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever had made that sound that night, it wasn't my imagination, and I was certain it wasn't done with me yet. Then, about a week later, during our shift change, I was talking to Nancy, one of the day shift supervisors. She'd been working on cruise ships for nearly 15 years and knew everything about the fleet, its stories, its secrets, and the rumors that floated between crew decks. But when I casually mentioned the strange noises I'd been hearing at night, her face changed completely. She stopped smiling, glanced around the pool deck to make sure no one was close, then pulled me toward the equipment storage area where the cameras couldn't see us. Her voice dropped low when she began to speak. That was when she told me about what really happened during a crossing back in the spring of 2017, something the company had erased from every record. 2 young crew members had died in that same lap pool. Their names were Nathan and Benjamin, both 19, both on their first contracts, full of excitement and trust. They were from small Midwestern towns, hired as seasonal crew. What should have been a playful initiation that night turned into horror. According to Nancy, a group of off-duty workers had been drinking and decided to test the new guys. They tied small weights to their ankles, laughing, and dared them to swim laps while the others cheered. No one thought it would end the way it did, but the laughter turned to panic when both boys slipped under the water and didn't come back up. The others were too drunk and too slow to react. By the time they pulled the bodies from the pool, it was too late. Nancy said the company's legal team worked fast, cleaning up everything before word could spread. They paid off the families, erased the footage, and threatened anyone who talked. The official report never mentioned any deaths. As she told me this, her voice barely rose above a whisper, and her eyes flicked nervously toward the hallway, as if she expected an officer to appear at any second. She said several crew members quit right after that voyage, unable to live with all of the guilt or the lies. The ones directly involved were quietly dismissed or moved to other ships, each with a fat severance package and a strict non-disclosure agreement. The ship docked early at its next port, not for cleaning, Nancy believed, but to hide what was left. Even the pool had been drained, scrubbed, and refilled with fresh water, as if that could wash away what happened. What haunted her most was the fact that both boys were trained swimmers. Nathan had been a lifeguard back home, and Benjamin was on his high school swim team. Drowning shouldn't have been possible for them, but mixed with alcohol, pressure, and cruelty, it became their grave. After hearing that, Everything I'd been experiencing suddenly made sense. Those splashes, the gasps, the sounds weren't random. They were echoes of what happened that night. Every shift after that felt heavier, as if I was being watched. I'd wait for the clock to hit 12:45 a.m., dreading it, knowing what would follow. The noises always came then. They started with splashing, then turned into those awful gasping breaths, lasting 2 to 3 minutes. It became a pattern, too perfect to be coincidence. I began writing everything down: time, weather, ship's position, everything that might explain it. But no matter how carefully I recorded it, it never changed. I even tried recording the sounds on my phone, but every file came back empty, just the hum of the engines and my own nervous breathing. It was as if whatever was happening existed somewhere between sound and silence, somewhere technology couldn't reach. Then one humid Friday night in early August, everything reached a breaking point. The noises were coming more often now, sometimes twice in one shift. That night, the sea was calm, and I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I set up my chair right by the lap pool, flashlight ready, determined to see what was really happening. At exactly 12:47 a.m., the deep end began to stir. The water rippled and churned violently, even though there was no one there. Then it started again. The gasping, frantic, wet sounds of someone struggling to breathe, but this time I could almost hear words. They were muffled and broken, like someone choking on invisible water, trying desperately to call for help. My heart pounded as realization struck like ice through my chest. I was hearing the final moments of Nathan and Benjamin, trapped, replaying over and over in the dark. My knees gave out and I began to cry, not from fear, but from sorrow so deep it hollowed me out. Those voices weren't haunting me out of malice. They were crying for peace, for acknowledgement, for release, and I knew then what I had to do. I couldn't let this continue. The next day, when we reached port, I spent hours in an internet cafe researching them. I found their hometowns, their families, their photos, tiny memorial pages that time had almost erased. I printed their pictures, wrote a short note apologizing for what happened, promising that they hadn't been forgotten. That evening, I placed the photos and the letter by the deep end of the lap pool, along with 2 small bouquets I'd bought from a vendor ashore. I sat there for hours, talking to them quietly, telling them about my studies, my dreams, my plans to become a marine biologist. I promised that I would make sure people knew their story and that the truth would never stay buried. That night, for the first time in weeks, the sounds didn't come. The water stayed calm, silent, peaceful. And in the days that followed, even after I transferred to another ship, the Heavenly Explorer, the noise never returned. It was as if the ocean had finally taken them home. After a long, exhausting year, I booked my next cruise as a way to start fresh. My sister had just moved across the country. I was between jobs, and life felt stuck. A friend told me a week at sea might help clear my head, so I took a last-minute deal on a mid-sized ship sailing from Galveston. It wasn't one of the massive floating cities with slides and amusement parks, just a quiet liner with basic comforts, dining hall, casino, bars, and a modest pool deck. I went alone, planning to read, write, maybe meet a few people. I didn't expect anything strange, but I was wrong. By the second day, I'd already fallen into a simple rhythm: mornings with coffee and ocean air, afternoons by the pool, evenings in the lounge at the stern. That's where I met Ellis, the bartender. He was charming, smooth, the kind of man who made you feel instantly welcome. He remembered your name, your drink, even how you liked it mixed. He joked easily, complimented naturally, and carried himself like someone who'd been doing this forever. I started spending more time there, drawn by the calm atmosphere and the friendly faces. One evening, only a few of us were at the bar, a couple from Vermont, an older man with his daughter, and me. We talked for hours, laughed, shared stories. At one point, Ellis grinned at one of my dating mishaps and said, "You'd be surprised how many disasters start with good cocktails." I laughed, paid my tab without thinking, and slipped my card back into my wallet. 2 days later, things started feeling off. While we were anchored near a small island, my phone pinged with a message from my bank, an alert about a purchase at a Miami boutique. I hadn't been anywhere near Miami in months. I brushed it off, assuming it was a glitch, but then another charge appeared, this time from an Orlando gas station. That's when the unease hit me full force. My hands shook as I locked my card through the app, my mind racing through every place I'd used it on the ship. And there was only one, Ellis's lounge. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. I didn't want to accuse someone without proof, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And this time, the danger felt different, quieter, human, and much closer than I wanted to believe. Before I even got on the ship, I had a feeling something wasn't right. My read-it card might have been skimmed, but it wasn't just me. That evening at dinner, I overheard a couple at the next table whispering about strange charges showing up on their account. They said they only used their card once, at the ship's bar, and couldn't figure out how they'd been charged again. I leaned over and quietly asked which bar it was. The moment they said the one near the jazz lounge in the back, my stomach dropped. Same place, same bartender. The next morning, I went to guest services to report it. The woman at the counter didn't seem shocked at all. I expected her to brush me off or say it was some overseas billing glitch, but instead she started asking questions. What bar, what day, who was working? Then she excused herself and stepped behind a frosted glass door. When she came back, her tone had changed. She thanked me, said my information was helpful, and added that they were already looking into some issues. That's when I realized it wasn't just me. This wasn't new. By that afternoon, the whispers had spread through the ship like wildfire. Rumors travel fast in closed spaces, like smoke with nowhere to go. People were checking their banking apps, exchanging worried glances. Someone on deck 6 said her husband saw Ellis, the bartender, handling their card too long, his phone angled strangely. Another said he always turned away slightly when swiping, blocking the view. Still, no one wanted to believe it. Ellis was too nice, too charming, too normal. But when the coincidences start piling up, they stop being coincidences. That evening, the bar was suddenly closed. A small sign read temporarily unavailable. No explanation. The air on board shifted. Everyone felt it. Ellis was gone. The next day, near the lower deck corridor, I overheard two officers speaking quietly. One held a tablet. I only saw the screen for a second, but I'm sure it was security. Footage, still frames with red circles around a hand holding a phone near a card terminal. The tension after that was thick enough to taste. The staff were polite, but distant. Conversations grew short, eyes lingered longer. No one mentioned Ellis again, but the silence said plenty. Rumors filled the gaps. Some said he'd been taken off quietly at the next port. Others swore he confessed after seeing the footage. Someone claimed they found hundreds of photos on his phone. Cards, names, numbers, expiration dates, all captured up close. No matter what was true, something inside me shifted. I couldn't stop replaying every conversation with him in my head. His easy smile, his jokes, how genuine he'd seemed. The theft wasn't what haunted me most. It was how easily he'd made me trust him. That was his real weapon. He didn't just steal money. He stole the illusion of safety. When I got back home, the cruise line sent an email, an empty apology saying the matter had been resolved according to marine and legal standards. My bank refunded the charges quickly, but no one ever said how many people were affected. Some said dozens, others said hundreds. I don't think we'll ever know. He could have been doing it for months. Maybe he wasn't even working alone. Now, I never use my card at bars, especially not at sea. And if someone gets too friendly, I watch their hands as much as their smile. Sometimes I still think about that trip, the laughter, the sunsets, the sense of calm that I once felt. But more than that, I remember the quiet horror of realizing the man who poured my drink might have been stealing something else entirely. The worst part? I probably thanked him for it. Here I am, 2 a.m., wide awake again, thinking about that cruise. Maybe writing it down will help me process it. I can't stop replaying it in my mind. I'm a 34-year-old accountant from Phoenix. Honestly, finding a parking spot at the mall used to be the most exciting part of my week. My wife, Jessica, had been begging me to take a break, saying I was burnt out. She was right. 3 straight months of 12-hour days during tax season had drained me completely. So when she found a deal for a 7-day Caribbean cruise, I said sure. November seemed perfect, a chance to relax and escape the Arizona heat. The ship was massive, a floating city called the Royal Horizon. Jessica planned everything before we even left. I just wanted rest. The first 3 days were bliss. I finally stopped thinking about spreadsheets and clients. We ate too much at the buffet, tried dance classes, and I even climbed the rock wall. The weather was perfect. The sea was so blue it looked unreal. Every night we'd sit on our balcony on deck 8, starboard side, watching the sunset while the staff smiled and asked if we needed anything. I remember thinking Jessica was right. Maybe I should take more breaks. The ship had a rhythm, meals, activities, and the gentle rocking at night that made me sleep deeper than I had in years. Everything felt safe, predictable, peaceful. Until Wednesday morning. That's when things started to feel wrong. I woke up around 6 o'clock in the morning, like I usually did, to walk the deck before everyone else woke up. Watching the sunrise over the water had become my favorite part of each day. But that morning, as I walked along deck 7, I heard voices from below, quiet but sharp, angry whispers mixed with the usual cheerful chatter of the crew. I leaned over the railing and saw a group of 4 people arguing. Their words jumped between Spanish and English. One man with an American accent said something about keeping it quiet until we dock, while another voice repeated, "No puede ser." My high school Spanish was rusty, but I knew it meant, "It can't be." There was urgency in their tone that froze me. These weren't the same smiling workers who folded towel animals or served drinks by the pool. The tension in their voices cut through it, the calm morning air like a blade. Then came the sounds of heavy footsteps on metal floors, several people moving quickly. I heard something being dragged, machinery scraping, even loud banging like hammers striking steel. It didn't sound like routine maintenance. I'd been on the ship long enough to know the usual noises, the kitchen clatter, the hum of engines, the soft whoosh of air vents. But this was different, fast, frantic, and wrong. I leaned over, trying to get a better view, but the deck blocked my line of sight. And then, as if someone had spotted me, the noises stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds before. It hung thick and uneasy. After a few minutes, the activity seemed to move deeper into the ship. I waited, listened, but heard nothing more. At breakfast, I told Jessica what I'd heard. She laughed it off, saying it was probably just early maintenance or some surprise event they were setting up. Her optimism almost convinced me she was right, until I saw something strange. In the dining room, 3 crew members I didn't recognize stood watching passengers instead of working. They wore the same uniforms, but their name tags were different. No cheerful names, no departments, just the word personnel, printed in plain black letters. They weren't serving anyone, just observing. One tall man with a neck tattoo kept staring directly at our table. When I looked back, he didn't smile like the others usually did. His supervisor said something to him and pointed elsewhere, but even as he moved, his eyes stayed fixed on us. When Jessica went to get coffee from the buffet, the man followed her. I watched as he pretended to wipe a nearby table but kept glancing at her plate, her napkin, even the chair she'd been sitting in. It wasn't cleaning, it was inspection. When she came back, she was chatting with Helen, an elderly woman from Michigan who was traveling with her sister. And Helen responded, "Okay, quickly," saying she'd seen something odd earlier that morning. Crew members working behind yellow tape down on deck 3, an area closed off to passengers. She said only certain staff were being allowed through. Her sister rolled her eyes, saying Helen watched too many crime shows, but I could tell from her trembling hands that she was genuinely scared. A chill crawled up my spine. It wasn't just me anymore. Someone else had noticed strange things too. By Thursday afternoon, the entire mood of the ship had changed. Rumors spread through the halls. People whispered in corners, forming little clusters of anxious passengers trading theories. Even the crew looked different, still polite but nervous. I asked Paulo, our room attendant, about the closed sections. His face went pale. He said management told them not to discuss operational matters with guests. That fear in his eyes told me enough. This wasn't maintenance. Something serious was happening. That day's ship newsletter included a new section about heightened security measures and urged passengers to report any unusual behavior. It sounded like they were telling us to spy on each other. The paranoia grew. Everyone watched everyone else. Then the captain announced a schedule delay due to port conflicts, meaning we wouldn't dock in Cozumel until much later. His voice over the intercom was unnaturally cheerful, but you could hear the strain beneath it. He kept saying to enjoy the extra time at sea. No one was buying it. That evening, the tension broke. While Jessica and I ate dinner, we saw passengers arguing with staff near guest services. A couple demanded answers about why their friend's cabin had been searched. Another family said their teenage son was questioned about where he'd been that morning. The staff apologized repeatedly, calling it routine security, but their excuses didn't make sense. The dining room, once full of laughter and music, now felt heavy and quiet. People ate quickly and left, avoiding eye contact. Then came Friday morning. I got up early again, but this time, what I saw made my blood run cold. Out on the horizon, 3 Coast Guard ships approached, their lights flashing in the dawn. Within an hour, officers in uniform boarded our ship. The captain's announcement shattered any illusion of calm. He asked everyone to stay composed and cooperate with authorities as they conducted a standard inspection. But no one believed that. 3 Coast Guard cutters don't come for a routine check. Jessica gripped my arm so tightly I thought she might leave bruises. Her fear mirrored mine. Officers spread through the ship in silence, knocking on cabin doors, checking IDs, asking questions. When they reached our room, the officer was polite but firm. He asked where we'd been, what we'd seen, whether any crew or passengers had behaved strangely. I told him everything, the arguing voices, the sealed deck, the new crew, the tattooed man. When I mentioned Helen's story, he took careful notes. His pen didn't stop moving. Later, all passengers were told to gather in the main auditorium. A stern woman in her 50s introduced herself as the lead investigator. She said they had credible intelligence about illegal smuggling on board. Some crew and possibly passengers were involved in moving illicit goods between ports. The investigation would continue until everyone responsible was found. She said innocent people had nothing to fear, but everyone would be questioned, and parts of the ship would stay closed. The room was dead silent, except for a few nervous coughs. The reality sank in. We were trapped in the middle of the ocean, part of something dark and dangerous. Hours turned into a blur of waiting and questioning. Conference rooms were turned into makeshift interrogation areas. They divided us into groups, calling names one by one. When my turn came, I told them everything again. The tattooed man's stare, the whispers I'd overheard, Helen's fear. It felt like betraying the crew, but I knew I had to help. The officer seemed especially interested in my mention of the neck tattoo. He jotted down more notes and nodded slowly. When I returned to the common area, the ship felt completely changed. Passengers avoided each other's eyes, as if everyone was a potential suspect. The investigation stretched into the next day. Officers brought dogs and scanning equipment, searching the crew areas, storage rooms, and even passenger luggage. Finally, on Saturday night, they made an arrest. It wasn't a passenger. It was the man with the neck tattoo, along with 2 other crew members. They'd been smuggling cocaine between ports, hiding it inside legitimate cargo, then retrieving it at each stop. When they realized the authorities were onto them, they tried to move the stash to the restricted section Helen had seen. Those voices I heard that Wednesday morning, they were arguing about whether to dump everything overboard or hide it. The operation had been going on for months. After they were taken away, things slowly went back to normal, but the illusion was gone. Everyone just wanted to get home. The laughter never really returned. The cruise ended, but something stayed with me. Months later, I still think about it, the way a simple vacation turned into a nightmare that made me question what safety even means. I had saved for that trip for over a year. I just wanted peace, something calm and quiet, not a wild party ship. Most of the people on board were families and older couples with a few solo travelers like me. I'm a middle school history teacher from New Hampshire, and this was supposed to be my break from everything. The first few days were perfect, smooth seas, good food, and kind strangers who became dinner companions. But on the 4th morning, the ship changed course. Someone had collapsed near the pool deck. At first, there were no announcements, just whispers of a seizure, a stroke, maybe worse. I saw the stretcher rush by the buffet, covered by a thin blanket. Hours later, the captain finally spoke, saying we'd make an unexpected stop to get the passenger medical help. The port we docked at wasn't on any map I recognized. It didn't look like a tourist spot at all, just a lonely supply dock with a few decaying buildings. The sign said, Ruris 16, a narrow pier stretching into nowhere. That's when I realized something about this trip had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Unlike the other ports, this one felt wrong from the start. There were no colorful signs, no lively markets, and no cheerful guides waving tourists around. The air was thick and heavy, sticking to the skin, and the sun glared down with an almost unnatural heat. Around 2 p.m., an announcement came from the crew. They said passengers could step off the ship for a few hours as long as we stayed in a marked area while a medical transfer was taking place. Most people didn't care to go, but a few of us were restless and curious. I joined a small group, mostly older passengers, 2 teenagers, and a man named Brandon, who I'd met earlier that week. He looked around his early 30s, wearing cargo shorts and an Arizona Cardinals hat. Quiet, but easy to talk to, the kind of person who made small talk feel natural. The port was eerily empty, as if it wasn't expecting us at all. We walked through the stillness. One old building had a small bar, another had a woman selling gum and bottled water from a cooler. There was no music, no chatter, only the slow hum of a dusty fan spinning overhead. Brandon and I sat on a bench near the edge of the dock for a while. He told me he was traveling alone after a breakup, half joking that he couldn't tell if the ocean air was making him feel better or worse. He smiled, but there was something tired behind it. Around 4 p.m., a crew member began calling us back using a bullhorn. We all drifted toward the gangway slowly. I remember Brandon clearly, nodding as he talked to one of the teens in front of me. He was the first to step onto the ship, and before he disappeared into the crowd, he turned and gave a small wave. I waved back. That was the last time I saw him. Dinner that night felt off. Martin and Evelyn, the couple who usually sat at my table, kept glancing at the empty chair beside them. "Wasn't Brandon supposed to sit here?" Martin asked. I assumed he was just running late. It happens all the time on cruises. People skip dinner for the buffet or just crash early. But when an hour passed and he still hadn't shown up, I felt a strange unease that I quickly brushed off. By the next morning, though, everyone was talking. Someone said Brandon's cabin door had been found open. Another said a steward checked inside and found nothing. No luggage, no clothes, no sign he'd ever been there. Then, just before lunch, a woman near the atrium claimed she'd seen him reboard the ship. 3 others said the same, describing his gray backpack and red hat. But when questioned, the crew insisted he never came back. By the afternoon, the ship's atmosphere shifted. Conversations grew quieter, eyes more watchful. Evelyn seemed deeply unsettled, almost protective of Brandon, despite barely knowing him. She went to the front desk to ask questions, but the crew brushed her off with vague lines like, "We're looking into it," or "Everything's under control." Later, she told me the officer she spoke to looked confused and claimed no passenger with that name existed in the system. That's when it started feeling truly strange. I knew Brandon was real. I'd spoken with him, laughed with him, even sat next to him on the dock. Yet when I checked the ship's itinerary, his name wasn't listed for any of the activities we'd both attended. It was like he'd been erased. Curiosity got the better of me, so I looked back through my photos. I remembered taking one at the little bar on shore, with Brandon sitting beside me. When I zoomed in, he wasn't there. The bench was empty, though I could see other people clearly in the background. I checked my whole gallery. Nothing. Not a single trace of him. It made my stomach twist. Evelyn swore she'd seen him during lifeboat training on the first day, and one of the teens said Brandon had lent him a charger, but suddenly, everyone started second-guessing themselves. "Maybe I mixed him up with someone else," one woman murmured nervously. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the upper deck around 1:30 a.m., the ship too quiet, like it was holding its breath. As I passed a crew-only door near the rear stairs, I heard slow footsteps behind it, steady, deliberate. I stopped, listening. The sound paused, then stopped completely. I backed away, heart racing. Near a decorative plant by the stairwell, something caught my eye, a small laminated badge wedged underneath. Instinct made me pick it up. It had only a first name, Brandon, and a cabin number, no photo. I looked up and realized I was standing just 2 doors away from that room. The door was cracked open, not fully shut, just slightly ajar. I hesitated, then pushed it gently. The lights were off, but the glow from the hallway outlined the inside. The bed was perfectly made. There were no bags, no toiletries, not even a key card. Just a single napkin on the pillow, the kind they hand out with poolside drinks. Expecting some joke, I unfolded it. 2 words were scrawled in uneven handwriting. "Don't follow." My chest tightened. I stood there too long, unsure if it was a prank or something far worse. I folded it up and hid it in my cabin drawer under my journal. The next morning, it was gone. The drawer was untouched, but the napkin had vanished. I didn't tell anyone. I already knew what they'd say. At breakfast, Evelyn looked pale and restless. "Did he ever tell you his last name?" she whispered. I froze. I couldn't remember. Neither could anyone else, not even the kid who borrowed his charger. That's when we both realized something was wrong. Brandon's identity didn't exist. After we disembarked, I called the cruise line's customer service from the airport. I gave them his first name, cabin number, and description. The woman put me on hold, then returned with a calm, practiced tone. "I'm sorry, sir, but that name doesn't match any registered passenger from your sailing." I pressed harder, asked if maybe a staff member had stayed in that room or if someone snuck aboard. She replied that their logs showed the room as unoccupied for the entire trip. I hung up feeling disoriented, like I'd fallen out of reality. That night, I barely slept. The image of that folded napkin kept flashing in my mind. A few weeks later, Evelyn sent me a message from one of those cruise community boards. She'd found something strange, a 3-year-old passenger list from another ship in the same fleet. A man named Brandon C., early 30s, from the same state, had gone missing during a shore excursion. His body was never recovered. According to the post, he was last seen heading back to the ship. I reread it 3 times, each word sinking deeper. The name, the age, the eerie similarity. It was too exact to be chance. Yet no one ever mentioned that case again. No statement, no investigation update, nothing. I don't know who or what Brandon really was. I just know I met him. I remember his calm voice, the Cardinals hat, and the way he stared out at the endless blue water. Since that cruise, I've only taken vacations on land. I don't talk about it unless I'm sure the person will believe me. Every now and then, Evelyn sends a screenshot from their cruise group post. Another quiet man in a red hat, vanishing mid-trip. She and I still check in sometimes. And the strangest part, the first name is always the same.